I am lagging here a little bit, Sean. I apologize. We
All
got to
good.
get that ironed out. But nonetheless, guys, welcome to another episode of Scotty Talks NBA. This is Sixers Talk edition. You can see I am accompanied by a very special guest in my good buddy, Sean Barnard. You guys may know him from Philly Sports Network, Pick Swap Pod, which he actually owns and is the founder of. You guys will probably know him from the Fox Gambler as well. There's so much Sean has going on. If you haven't seen his face and you're in the city of Philadelphia, then you must live under a rock. But Sean, welcome to the show, my man. I do want to give you the time at the beginning of the show. We'll give it at the end as well to tell the viewers where they can ultimately find all of your work, because I don't want to skip. I don't want to miss out on any of the different brands that you are working with and contributing towards. So welcome to the show, man. How is your day going? And if you just want to plug yourself a little bit, they're here to start.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Scotty, and always good to be back on talking hoops with you. I'm excited, even as the Sixers are in the dead area of the offseason. Feels like they still find their way, popping up in the headlines and everything else. So good to keep me busy for sure. And as far as my work, you can follow me on Twitter at Sean_Bernard1. Can check out Pick Swap Media for a bunch of my own stuff. I got a new Pick Swap podcast dropping at 7 o'clock tonight, so that will be out.
Nice.
As well as catch me on Fox 1025 The Gambler. I'll be on Saturday 11 to 1. Pop in throughout the week. I'll be in for Friday 3 to 6 on the Daily Ticket with Sean Brace, doing a little party theme heading into the summer for that.
Nice.
So a bunch going on, and you can check out, subscribe to both the YouTube channels there, both at Fox the Gambler and Pick Swap Media, as well as some written work still slipping in at Philly Sports Network.
Awesome, man. And so there's a Pick Swap Media pod dropping tonight. What's that going to be about? You don't have to give too much information, but I'm just curious because I've been catching all of them recently myself.
Yeah.
So I'll be looking out for that when I go to the gym later, man.
I appreciate that. And yeah, dove in a little bit on the two-way guys, the James Harden stuff, talked to Tobias, talked a little bit about the Kyle Neubeck versus Keith Pompey feud that entertained me quite a bit this weekend, and hit a small things on this. So we'll diving into some more concrete free agent targets next week, but this was mainly kind of a Sixers touch-up one.
Gotcha. I will definitely be sure to check it out. Anybody out there viewing, you be sure to check it out as well. But Sean, let's get into the Sixers here. You mentioned it. We're in the dead part of the summer, the dead part of the offseason. As far as the Sixers, they've kind of, shut down pretty much anything and everything that Sixers fans, Sixers analysts, Sixers anything, content creators, any ideas that content creators across the board have tried to idealize here has pretty much been shut down by the Sixers. But I want to start with Tobias Harris here. Obviously, coming off a very eventful day yesterday for myself and for the Sixers community, nonetheless. Looking at Tobias Harris, obviously had the comments about Sixers fans basically saying casual Sixers fans want him traded for something as little as a Crumbl cookie is what he's saying casual Sixers fans are willing to take. What were your thoughts overall? Obviously, pointed out some fairly good statistics that he provides production-wise. What did you see there, and what were your thoughts overall of the Tobias Harris comments yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I have seen eye to eye on the fact that Tobias oftentimes gets a worse rep than he deserves. The biggest negative factor to Tobias is always going to be that contract, and that frankly is not his fault. It was what the Sixers offered to him, and he had every right to sign it when it was put in front of him. That was a Sixers decision to give him that money.
Yep.
As far as Tobias himself, I mean, for sure, you would hope for a little more production for that value, a guy you're paying $39-40 million a year to be on the court. But Tobias is also right in the aspect of, like, you're not able to get a guy like him in the open market like that. Like, all these Tobias Harris trades that we see flipping around, the only reason the Sixers do pull the trigger on a deal is if you can find a trade that complements this roster best and finds a way to increase their chances. They need a true wing, and there's not that many out there. Tobias himself isn't the perfect version of that, and I honestly think like a lot of what he's being asked to do are not the best aspects of his game, but it's still a guy that you at least know what you're getting. He's been a vital part of this team from a locker room perspective, and I do feel bad for an extent for Tobias for what the rap comes, but I do think the end of the Tobias Harris era is inching closer.
I do feel you there, man. Everything that you said overall, I think that it was spot on by Tobias to stick up for himself. I don't get me wrong. I do think it's one of these situations where he didn't have to engage in this conversation about. Same with his father, right? His father's kind of what sparked all of this. His comments
For
about
sure.
Tobias Harris being an assassin level scorer, which was certainly interesting. Man, he can score the ball. I think that's something that me and you have always been able to recognize. And the problem with the Sixers, more or less, is that the areas where he is best at scoring the ball
Right.
are generally where Joel Embiid scores the ball very well as well. And even Maxey, Harden, these are guys that you want to get shots before Tobias. So it hasn't been the most or the best fit for Tobias. And his roles change
Every
often,
year.
right?
Yeah.
Every single season, depending who else is on the roster, it's him that really has to adjust mainly. So it's really not fair, all the hate and all the disrespect that he gets. And that's why I try to balance my want for trading him and getting something in return that I think will be better for the Sixers, but also doing it in a manner where I don't completely disrespect him and the level of player that he's at. So I thought you made a great point there. It's kind of been like the struggle for me the last 3 years, honestly, is like trying to defend Tobias without feeling like I'm a Tobias stan, right? Like I'm not trying to play that part. I'm just trying to bring reality to a situation where things aren't always black and white, right? So I thought that was a great point. Where are you at with trading Tobias Harris based on the different trades that have already happened in the NBA? The one that caught me off guard, for example, Sean, and maybe it shouldn't have, but Chris Paul, he's 38 years old. He gets traded to the Warriors for Jordan Poole and draft compensation. Now, I understand Jordan Poole, he has the contract situation. He has the Draymond situation, right? Ultimately, that's why the Warriors had to move him. But for a 38-year-old Chris Paul, the Wizards were able to get a nice young piece for the future there and 2 draft picks for the future as well, which kind of made me think, there's got to be some type of market out there for Tobias. But then you look at the John Collins trade on the other side, right? He has 3 years. It was like, I think it's like $78 million left on his contract. But he got traded for virtually nothing, right? It was a second round pick and Rudy Gay, who's like 36 years old. So where are you at with all of this speculation, all of the rumors in mind, as far as trading Tobias Harris? Is that still, besides bringing back James Harden, is that still like your number one priority, you would say?
Yeah, trading Tobias is definitely still plan A for me, but it's also, you can't just trade him for the sake of trading him, that you have to wait for the right deal to manifest itself. And I do think that there is a market for him. I think teams should be looking for that potential cap hit to get money off their books by taking him for a season, playing out the contract, and that's a great opportunity for him. And as much as like Tobias takes some dirt, takes some heat, he's not a bad guy to have on your team, and you can swallow that for a season, especially when you look around at some of the younger teams, the rebuilding teams. That's a good veteran to add to a young core. If you look around at a team like the Rockets or the Pistons or something like that, the Magic, even send him back to Orlando, things like that, I do think makes sense. But like, once again, it takes 2 to tango, that you have to make sure that the right deal pops up. And I think Daryl Morey especially is going to be careful with that. It wouldn't surprise me if this stretches out until the trade deadline. And you also got to look at it from the same perspective of the Sixers have the same appeal of getting off that contract at the end of it. If you want to swallow it for a season, for me, I think that's very tied to James Harden. Say we're in a world where James Harden walks away. There's not that much cap relief of that specifically because of the situation they're in. But if you then look ahead to the end of the offseason and you could potentially open a max slot next offseason, maybe that means something. If we're in a world where James Harden signs a 3-year deal, that Tobias off the books really doesn't mean that much to the Sixers. So I still think the Harden decision is going to shape a lot of the Sixers team. But regardless, I do think that a Tobias trade needs to be looked for. I think it will be had. I don't know if it happens this summer. I think that I'm more leaning toward the world where this extends into the season and we look at the deadline of teams looking to blow it up. The Chicago Bulls are a team that I have my eye on, that I feel like that they got to be hitting that wall and that ceiling and looking to rebuild. If there's a world where we can find either a DeRozan or a Levine trade, I think there could potentially be something there. But I guess the bottom line right now is it's sitting down, you're waiting for the market to figure itself out and hoping something pops that makes sense for the Sixers.
Yeah, no, I think that all makes sense. you mentioned Kyle Neubeck and Keith Pompey earlier. Interesting thought there. Obviously, the rumor about Evan Mobley and Jared Allen and some draft compensation. Obviously, I mean, Daryl Morey would be kind of insane to ask for that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But you do posture in this league, right? And who knows what those talks actually went like. Um, do you believe that report at all? Like, do you believe the interest? Like, how far? Where's the line you draw with that Keith Pompey report? Right, just the teams that were interested, or even down to the package. I know Kyle Neubeck kind of refuted it in a sense. If you could elaborate on that situation a little bit there.
Yeah, and I'll start off by saying that I consider Kyle my go-to source for Sixers news. I would consider him my number one guy for having the ins and out of this team, of this organization, everything. I think Keith Pompey, first off, for starters, at this time of year, everything that's reported and when there's sources involved, there tends to be a motivation behind it or a driving force that they're trying to. In this case, I absolutely think it came from the Tobias Harris camp, more specifically the Tobias Harris father's camp, which we've seen him making his rounds. And I think the clear recognition here is that Tobias and the Sixers are on the same page of wanting him traded.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there was a call with the Cavs. The Cavs very well could have been a team having interest. I don't think that there was any conversation regarding this specific package. And as Kyle laid out in the article, it didn't make sense for three specific factors. Number one is Tobias straight up is not worth more than any of those individual things. Evan Mobley, who is likely a guy who could end up with has an all-star appearance in his bag before, something Tobias has never done.
Yeah.
On top of that, the reason that you're doing a Tobias Harris trade is for better fitting pieces to add to the Sixers core. Adding two centers is the opposite of that. And the biggest hammer, which Kyle laid down pretty harshly in the article, which I do appreciate, was that this trade is just not legal under the CBA, either the new or the old one. So I do think this was fed to him. It was not quite the due diligence on Keith Pompey's parts to go and double check this, but it was entertaining to me to see these two kind of hash it out in a newspaper setting. But yeah, I don't think that offer was true.
It was very interesting. It was just funny because I came out of reading the Keith Pompey report and thinking, man, well, I must be doing. That's why I'm not a GM, right? Like, because I would have taken Karis LeVert and Isaac Okoro. So, like, yeah, you probably shouldn't hire me as the GM, especially if you believe in what George Niang thinks. But nonetheless, what I wanted to shift to here with you answering those questions, obviously, feels like they're at least going to run it back until the start of the season, like you said. As I'm getting further away from the idea and getting more comfortable with the idea of starting the season with the same starting lineup, I do start to understand why patience could ultimately benefit the Sixers if they waited out until the trade deadline. I do understand it at this point. With that in mind, running it back, starting the season with the same starting lineup, is Nick Nurse enough in your eyes to give, say, Daryl Morey, right? If Daryl Morey's job is on the line this season, right, going into this season, you have to get us out of the second round this season, Daryl Morey, or you're going to lose your job. Is Nick Nurse enough to give Daryl Morey confidence that the Sixers can do that? Is Nick Nurse enough to get the Sixers over the hump alone? Maybe just with the more smaller marginal ads as far as role players.
Yeah, my short answer to this is no. There just has to be more to be done. Like, as much as there's coaching complaints and stuff that Doc Rivers absolutely deserves blame for, like, there's still some roster construction issues with this team. There was last year that need to be addressed, and we haven't seen any part of those fixes so far. We went without making a draft pick, made a couple two-way additions. Has not really been any buzz as far as guys these Sixers are connected to. I know things will fully kick off. So we'll start to see things fall into place from there, starting with James Harden in that decision. But I do need to see more. And I will say that I do think the Nick Nurse addition is going to make more of a difference than some people are regarding. When you look at, like, these playoffs, like, you watch how the Nuggets play or how the Warriors play or something like that. It looks like a different sport than what the Sixers were doing. And just having a little modernization in this offense to where it's not give it to Joel Embiid at the elbow and let him figure it out, or let James Harden dribble around for 20 seconds to the shot clock and then take a step back three. Get me a little more motion. Get me some
Yeah.
shooters running off ball. Things like that will absolutely change the picture, make things look better, and make everyone's lives easier. So I am looking forward to that from the Nick Nurse perspective, but I still think that there needs to be some roster additions and moves made before we can consider this team a legitimate contender.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Especially you look at a team like Boston, depending how you view that Kristaps Porzingis trade, right?
Weird one.
Depending what Milwaukee's able to do with Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez, their free agents, we will know what the East is looking like very soon, especially with the Sixers as well. Which I do want to get to James Harden here, and this is a perfect segue. With this in mind, now this is a double-edged sword as far as a question here. What is the ideal contract in your eyes of bringing James Harden back? And if there is an ideal contract, do you want to bring James Harden back, given all the tug and pull, right, between Houston and Philadelphia? Now you have an LA Clippers rumor pop up that they're a sleeper at getting James Harden. Do you want him back, given all of the apparent thought that he's given to going back to a Houston team that they've had great drafts the last few years? If we're being honest, they're building it the right way. They have a ton of cap space. There's a way that they can get into the playoffs, but I think believing that they're going to be a contender, even with Harden, is a little bit of fool's gold there, to think that way. So with that in mind, you would think the Sixers are the best opportunity for Harden to win. Do you even want Harden back? And what's the ideal situation bringing him back?
Yeah, I mean, if you pin me down right now and say, do I want James Harden to be the point guard of the 76ers next year? My answer is probably no, but I also can kind of silence my feelings, take a look at the bigger picture, and realize that it is the best option for them, that there's just not a clear option for them to contend on the market. And to be fair to James Harden, he has done what they've asked. He led the NBA in assists last year. He had 2 40-plus point games in the playoffs. There's been moments where he has it, but there's also the thing that is incredibly frustrating me about James Harden is when you see the bad, like it's so bad, like it's harmful to have him on the court bad, and that just happens far too often. As far as like the numbers in the contract, I do think things are trending toward him being back in Philadelphia. I know Harden wants the long-term deal, the security, which is also a red flag to me that you don't have the I guess guts or confidence in yourself to bet on you again. If you put me, Sean Barnard, in charge of the Sixers and had to have this conversation, my conversation with James Harden would be, look, you have a player option for $36.5 million. That is our offer. You can opt in and be a part of the Sixers at that price. That is your choice. I'm not extending a multi-year option. I don't expect that to be what actually happens, and I think Daryl Morey has a blind spot for James Harden more than any other player in the entire NBA. I think it's likely that this ends probably a 3-year deal, probably 2 years plus a player option, somewhere in like the $35 to $40 million range. I just don't see. I think his expectation was to get paid this offseason. That he took the pay cut last offseason. I still think to some extent that happens. I don't feel great about it, but that's kind of what I expect at this point.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, because that's it's kind of like I've been like backed into a corner with this situation, because it's like, yes, I want to kind of shift and give the keys to Tyrese Maxey and kind of just go forward that way and see what comes of that. There is a part of me that wants to do that. See if we can get to Maxey's ceiling anytime soon, right?
Yeah.
With Harden, it's tough because, as you mentioned, on a safe, less risky type of situation that you're looking for, it's less risky to bring Harden back because you know what Harden is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I guess I could say, because the reason I asked this, or the reason I bring this up, can the Sixers win with him? You just mentioned the floor that Harden provides, which is, it's beyond backbreaking for the Sixers at times, to put it frankly, right? Yeah. He if he's not scoring offensively, he's not getting involved defensively. There's times where he's on offensively, he'll put his hands in the passing lanes, he'll be there on defense, he'll move his feet. But when it's not flowing offensively, when he's not hitting his shot, when he's not getting the ball where he wants it, it seems that he takes plays off, he quits on the team in certain instances. And so for me, I look at Tim Legler's comments from ESPN the other day, right? And I also think about what you said earlier with how Nick Nurse is going to change things in Philadelphia, a more free-flowing offense, the ball moving around. And he's a guy that does ask his guards to defend, right?
Yeah.
How does one, James Harden, fit in with a Nick Nurse coach team? And two, are you erring on the side of, say, Tim Legler, who believes that they can't win with James Harden regardless? So there's really no point in bringing him back, spending all that money, and then Joel Embiid asks for a trade next offseason anyways, right? Or do you believe that they can win? There is a version of this team that can win with James Harden under Nick Nurse. Where are you at with that, with those thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll start with the Nurse thing. I'm very curious to see how things look under Nick Nurse because, I mean, for starters, this is a guy who I find this very appealing when you look at the upbringing of him as a head coach, that he's done a little bit of everything. He's coached overseas, he's coached at the G League level. He's had to learn things like learn lessons such as like, oh wow, like our best scorers just got called up to the NBA. I got to figure out an offense or things like, oh, we don't have these guys available tonight. Let me scramble. Those things are very valuable to me. And when you compare that to a guy like Doc Rivers, who has just, not to diminish it, but who has been an NBA coach purely for the past 50 years or whatever it is, like it's the same situation. So I like the creativity from Nurse. He's going to be forced to use that because from a roster construction standpoint, the Sixers and Raptors could not be more different. Like we're talking about a Toronto roster, which is just made out of positionless athletes, guys that are switchable, can go 1 through 5, all can put the ball on the floor a little bit. The Sixers have built their roster pretty much the opposite end of the spectrum of pretty niche guys that have their specific roles and have lacked athleticism across the board. So there's going to have some sort of meet in the middle there. I think free agency will dictate that a little bit. For Harden specifically, he's not a Nurse guy pretty much under any definition in how he fits in this. So I don't know how that swayed his outlook on the Sixers. If it helped, hurt, didn't affect, whatever. I do think money's the bottom line.
Yeah.
As far as Harden's outlook on the Sixers as a championship contender, it sucks because the best version of James Harden is exactly what the Sixers need. But not getting that is, and you're not going to get that. Like I don't even have confidence to say that we're going to get the version of James Harden we got last playoffs in next year's playoffs. Like I do think we're on the downside of things. And I don't think that there's a world where the Sixers win a championship with James Harden as your number 2 option. Now, can Tyrese Maxey kind of catapult him and become that guy? Is there a world where there's a trade where the Sixers pull off a Zach LaVine or DeMar DeRozan, and then that's kind of your go-to guy in those situations? Maybe those are changes. I think Harden is good enough as a playmaker. He's smart enough as a high IQ basketball guy to fill in the gaps in those regard. But the lows of the lows are still so frustrating to me. So I think if the game plan is to run it back with Harden and Embiid as the duo and Maxey kind of still figuring out his role, I don't feel great about it. But I still think there's a world where he can be an effective player on a championship team. I just don't think it's as a number 2 guy.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Sean, because, you think about James Harden and if he would just sit back, I hate to use that term, but sit back and give the keys to Tyrese Maxey from a scoring standpoint, still do the facilitation, still take the open shots that are there for you because you're going to get plenty of them in an offense with Embiid. But just like you said, take that back seat to Maxey and Embiid. Let Maxey get up in the front passenger seat next to Embiid, and you take the back seat because that's the point you're at in your career. But the rumors after the season end lead me to believe that he's not going to be willing to do that. And that's ultimately what concerns me going forward, man. With that in mind, so you brought up the Nick Nurse thing and like what drew Nick Nurse to the Sixers, right? Mostly money. Maybe it's the relationship with Morey to an extent from Houston. But nonetheless, mostly money and probably Joel Embiid, right? Having a player of that caliber. Yeah. What does that structure? Is this just something we're gonna have to wait and find out as far as organizationally? Like, if Harden comes back, is he going to have more pull in your eyes than, say, a Nick Nurse? Like, and the reason I bring that up, because you brought up Harden's floor and the lows of the low. If Harden is hitting that floor, let's say in game 6 of a playoff series or, whatever, game 2 of the first round, whatever the case may be, Harden's hitting his floor. He's turning the ball over. He's not hitting a shot. He's not finishing at the rim. He's not playing smart basketball. He's not doing his part on the defensive end. Do you ever see a place where Nick Nurse has enough power to sit Harden down on the bench? Is that something that I just will never see in today's NBA when you're talking about a star the level of Harden? Or is there a world where Nick Nurse is this guy that holds his team completely accountable? That's how he sets the culture. Because that's the feel I get from you, from Toronto, excuse me. Is there what does that structure look like in your mind? Is that something we're gonna have to wait and see? Or do you think if Harden comes back, it's his team basically? Because obviously Doc Rivers, he played a big part in that in the first place.
Yeah, I think we're going to figure it out a little bit as the season goes on. I kind of have more optimism that Nurse will have that level of whatever you want to guard it, like stones, guts, like
Yeah.
just willing to do it, that kind of thing. I kind of think he will. One of the like complaints coming from like Raptors Twitter and Raptors fans out there is kind of Nurse's inconsistency on minutes for guys. That to me, I look at as like a positive. Like I would welcome that based on what we've had the past couple of years of the rigid by the books every night game plan. So I'd kind of like to see the nights where we only see Harden for maybe 25 minutes, and then there will be nights where he's looks good and we need him for 40, things like that. I hope that's the case. I can't guarantee that, and I think we're going to kind of learn that. I do want to say, as far as the Nurse and Morey relationship, it feels right now like a lot more hand in hand as far as like the vision from here. And I know you want to touch on the two-way guys in a minute, but I think it starts with that too, as far as like a developmental arc and track. That always felt like it was missing to me under Doc Rivers. And it always should be mentioned, I believe, that Doc Rivers was brought here before Daryl Morey, and that Doc did hold some sort of front office weight. He was at least a voice in that room when it came to decision making and things like that. And you see the guys like Isaiah Joe slipping through the cracks because there's not that clear eye-to-eye vision. When you have a coach and a GM that have the same mindset when it comes to trying guys out, focusing on development, all things that Nick Nurse seems to value very highly and that the Sixers absolutely need to be capitalizing on, I have a lot more optimism in that long-term outlook, but I don't know how exactly it reflects on like the short-term decision-making.
Yeah, like how do they get that done, right? If you're shifting towards that outlook and that direction you want to take the franchise. I think that's a good segue point. As you mentioned, I did want to bring this up. This is all coming from this Michael KB report that the Sixers may get outpriced by other teams as far as Jalen McDaniels, right? And Jalen McDaniels is a guy that you ultimately traded Matisse Thybulle in the 34th pick. And the thing that kind of, blows me more, if Jalen McDaniels ultimately does leave this offseason, it's not even really the the Matisse Thybulle thing. It's actually the draft pick that we were trying to buy back in the draft, right? And you look back on that, if this guy walks out of the door, you didn't even have to go through all those efforts. You could have just kept that pick and kept Matisse Thybulle. Maybe he did prove something down the stretch in the end, when you consider how much Jalen McDaniels didn't even really play in the playoffs. First of all, let me ask this. Do you think the market is calling for a guy like Jalen McDaniels to get paid at a level that the Sixers aren't going to be able to match? Just based on what you're seeing, rumors, financial situations of other teams, and then, of course, just the other guys that are available in the market.
I think it's more likely that the Sixers kind of have done themselves a favor by hiding him and not playing him, that there might not be that high of a market for Jalen McDaniels. But with that being said, like it takes one team. Like it takes one team to say, I like him. I remember what he did used to look like, or him coming out of college, that I really liked his tape. Let me take a flyer on him and throw him $10 million for this season. And that might be a price where the Sixers are like, okay, I'll let you walk for that. I do think they should do everything possible to bring Jalen McDaniels back, especially when we're talking about Nick Nurse and the roster stuff. He's the type of player that Nick Nurse seems to really like. And I honestly was frustrated to your point about it. The draft pick's absolutely valid and frustrating that was given up. I was also especially frustrated that I still don't concretely know what Jalen McDaniels is as a basketball player. We just did not get that opportunity to see him. And there's things that he does do that are necessary on the Sixers roster. Talking about a guy that is long switchable, a lob threat, which we have not had in years, and just is should be a safety valve next to Joel Embiid. Having a guy being able to cut baseline and catch a lob. You see the Nuggets do it with Aaron Gordon on several times a night, and it's just an effective offense that the Sixers have never had that option. So the skill set wise, I do like Jalen McDaniels and will like him back. To me, it comes down to that. If there's one team that wants to take a flyer on him and can outbid the Sixers, I think that's very possible. But I don't think his market's going to be ridiculous.
Do you look at McDaniels and Paul Reed in the same light? Because there was a lot of hype kind of coming out, around Paul Reed, other teams maybe being interested in him and giving him a larger role than what he could get at in Philadelphia. Do you look at him and McDaniels in that same light where there could very well be a team that comes in and swoops and takes Paul Reed?
Similar. I think me and the Sixers' perception of it is Paul Reed's regarded pretty much higher, I would say.
Yeah.
He
They
has
want
taken
him back more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, he has taken strides forward every season. He's done everything that they've asked of him developmentally. He's
Yeah.
another guy who's a Nick Nurse guy, and
Yeah.
there's like a clear defined role for him. Like this backup center thing has been plaguing the Sixers throughout Joel Embiid's tenure. Paul Reed has given him the best minutes that they've seen there, and we've now seen him
Absolutely.
win a job over a number of veterans now, whether it be DeAndre Jordan, Dwayne Dedman,
Yep.
Dwight Howard, even if you want to throw him in the mix with this. Like Paul Reed has been through the mud and has kind of proved himself here. So I do think Paul Reed is welcomed back and held in high regard. He's also been continually working out at the Sixers facility, which, not to hang your hat on that, but that's definitely a good sign when it comes to something like this. So
Yeah.
I'm much more confident that Paul Reed will be back, and he's definitely, I think, significantly higher on the priority list for the Sixers.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because Paul Reed, he's had like the Sixers attire on when he's working out. Same thing with Jalen McDaniels. So it's like maybe and the thing with Jalen McDaniels, I do wonder is like how much he wants to win as well, right? And does that play a factor playing for a contender, considering he spent the first part of his career in Charlotte? But I don't know how that works with restricted free agents. Does that matter? Like if somebody comes and sign, does he have to agree to the offer sheet or?
Sixers will have a chance to match. So basically the Sixers have final say on like if they want to match that, then he's staying with the Sixers is how that goes.
Does
But
he have to accept the contract though, or can the team just put a contract offer on the table? Sixers have to either match that or he goes to that team, I guess is what I'm asking.
yeah, so like a team would take a flyer, send in the offer sheet for what it is. Jalen McDaniels presumably says like, yes, I would take that.
Yeah.
He doesn't really the restricted free agency is something that the players don't have a ton of power and they definitely hate doing, but it just kind of works itself that way. Contractually happens to a lot of second round picks just on how they flow, things go. But the team would send in that offer sheet, and then the Sixers would have final say of basically let you walk or let you go. And I've never really seen like a true bidding war on a restricted free agent. So I guess the highest offer is how it goes from there. I honestly don't know the full intricacies of that, but I believe that's how it goes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. Like if the Detroit Pistons come in and offer $13 million a year for Jalen McDaniels, he doesn't want to go there, but does he have to, given that they put the offer on the table? But with that in mind, just the last free agent that has been rumored to potentially come back to the Sixers, I should say. Obviously, Shake Milton is a free agent, but more or less it seems like he's going to go find a different role, a bigger role elsewhere. Georges Niang, obviously, he had some choice words to say to me yesterday. I feel like I didn't say anything too bad about him in that post. I'm just ready to go in a different direction as far as team makeup, team build. In my eyes, I do believe you had Daniel House opt back into his contract for next year. I look at him and Georges Niang in a similar light. I think they're, in a sense, very redundant just from their body size, their shape. I know Daniel House does a little bit more on defense. He gets out on the break a little bit better. Georges Niang's the better shooter, of course. And you always do need shooting. Yeah. What I want to ask you about this, do you think the Sixers should bring back Georges Niang? Do you think that he ultimately can play a role in a Nick Nurse style of team? And with that being said, how aggressive do you expect the Sixers to be in retaining him?
It was very entertaining to me to see Georges Niang quote tweeting you too. By the way, that was not something I expected on the timeline, but
it was interesting. It was interesting. I try to keep it professional with him, man. Like I don't dislike Georges Niang. Like it's not like I'm saying he doesn't belong in the NBA. I just don't want him on the Sixers because I want a team that's more athletic. I want a longer team. I want those two-way players that you talked about earlier. So that's just where I'm at. But I'm interested to hear where you're at, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think Georges is lower on the pecking order of the Sixers' priorities. Absolutely, I think he's a guy that they will extend an offer and have conversations with. But I think he's one of the more, I would rank Shake as the most likely to leave and Niang right behind him if I'm doing my
Gotcha.
order of operations there. I kind of view Niang, I think, a little more positively than most. I mean, I don't think he's a guy that you want in your playoff rotation. I don't think
Yeah.
he's that quality, but I think he's a good guy to have through the length of an 82 game season. I kind of look at him role wise as more of just like a pure shooter, and everything else that he brings is
Yeah.
like, bonus to me.
Yeah.
He is a really high level shooter, like
Yeah.
high volume, high efficiency, super quick release. That was the biggest thing that surprised
Yeah.
me. I think the Sixers got him on good value coming over here. He
Yeah.
really is not afraid to let it fly and gets it off in such a quick rate, which we really haven't seen from a lot of Sixers players over this year. So I still like him in a world, and if we can have him back just as a guy to space the floor, play off
Yeah.
Joel Embiid that can capitalize on doubles, things like that, he's still a worthwhile roster spot to me. But it's definitely like I'm not going to be freaking out if Georges Niang gets
Breaking the
extended
bank.
an offer. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think it is probably more likely than not that he gets an offer the Sixers aren't willing to match, or a more extended opportunity for another franchise, not the Sixers.
Yeah, because I think as you laid that out there, while Georges Niang hasn't like blown our minds as far as since he's come to the Sixers, he has been a quality
Yeah.
player for the most part, right? There's just very seldom times where you're playing the Celtics or something and he just can't be on the floor because he can't guard a wing or whatever the case may be. But there are the good times, the bang bang Georges Niang times where that you enjoy and that you do remember about him. And I think that puts it into perspective just as far as what he does bring. I think I've just been such in the mindset of like change the identity of this team that maybe I'm being a little harsh on Georges Niang. But nonetheless, it'll be interesting to see if the Sixers can hold on to him. One last final question for you here. Well, two. I should say two. I want to get your thoughts on the undrafted free agents that the Sixers picked up. Any of them that you like? Thoughts on where, if they could possibly get some time on this team with Nick Nurse as head coach, a guy that does try different things. Thoughts on the undrafted free agents, and then any free agent targets that you have in mind. Any free agents that you think might give the Sixers a hometown discount. I had guys like Lonnie Walker, Dante DiVincenzo. See, DiVincenzo's looking at New York Knicks now.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, those are some guys that came to mind for me. Obviously, the Philly roots, or at least the surrounding area. Maybe you can get a hometown discount from guys like that. Are there any specific free agents that you're looking at, or any skill set, I guess you would say? And you may have already answered that.
Yeah, I mean, for the two-way guys, I'll say I'm more excited than I expected to be. These are all good targets and the type of players you should be looking to fill your two-way slots with. I mean, Terquavian Smith could have been drafted at the early second round, and nobody would have blinked an eye. Terquavian Smith specifically was a guy that we flash back to last year leading up to the draft, and he was growing into one of my guys that I was ready to pound the table for, be like, this guy's going to be very good. Went back for a sophomore year at college. His efficiency took a slip. He played next to Jarkel Joyner, who was a little redundant in their styles of play there. So I think he kind of got the short end of going back to college. It did not work out for him, but I still do believe in his talent. His body needs to catch up. Weighs 165 pounds at 6'4", which is just not NBA size. But he's a high-level athlete, a guy that wants to go up and dunk it on you. He's very smooth in the way that he approaches. He can catch fire, and he's going to be a guy that at the minimum is a blast to watch in Summer League. At the maximum, I think there's a world where he is a rotation NBA player. So those are the type of guys that you want to take flyers on, and I do like him. I do believe in him. Ricky Council IV has been the guy that I've seen the most consensus excitement about. A guy that when you look at this NBA draft, Anthony Black was drafted 6th overall. Nick Smith Jr. was a first-round pick. Ricky Council IV was the leading scorer on that Arkansas team and was their go-to scorer for many
That
occasions.
was interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and a guy that impressed me. The shooting numbers are down. He spent his first 2 seasons at Wichita State, transferred to Arkansas for this year. His shooting numbers were better at Wichita State, which is a room for optimism, but I do think that there is some like mechanical issues that need to be worked through. He's a 27% three-point shooter last year. That's not going to cut it, and I think his shot is pretty much going to make or break his NBA outlook. But I will say he's another guy that is very exciting to watch, high-level athlete, and Terquavian Smith's very much like a smooth athlete in the way that he operates, kind of like a long jumper, the way he like gets through the lane. Ricky Council IV is like a power athlete. Like he's like a jump, dunk it on you, get up, go strong, which very fun to watch once again. So I am excited to see what these guys have in summer league. Azuolas Tubelis, I'll throw out there too, is the other two-way slot. Arizona guy, the best numbers across the board from him. Spent 3 years at Arizona, originally from Lithuania. He's like that small or the stretch five that we kind of have always hoped, but he's to me, I'm probably the lowest on him. He's the most skilled. He knows how to play basketball, good passer, great feel, but just like I don't buy the athleticism. He really can't defend anyone. And he also measured in at 6'8" at the combine after being listed at 6'11" for all of college.
Oh
so
man.
yeah, so that doesn't bode well for the stretch five hopes for sure. 6'8" is just not center size at the NBA nowadays. So I have concerns there, but who knows? We'll see what these guys got in summer league. They're the right kind of guys to throw flyers at, is I guess how I feel about that. As far as free agent targets, yeah, they're gonna have to dig through the bargain bin for sure. There's still some names out there I like. Torrey Craig to me is pretty much at the top of the list of a guy I want to target. That two-way wing. Reggie Jackson's a buy low guy that I could see. The guy that kind of played himself out of the rotation for that Denver team. He's much more of like a free flowing. To me, that would be a very cool Shake Milton replacement, and in my mind, an upgrade there. So I would love that if he's. I don't expect his market to be super strong. That's a guy I have my eye on. Damian Lee, I've seen his shooting numbers. He shot great last year. Yuta Watanabe played with Nick Nurse in Toronto. Another guy that is a guy that can shoot the lights out and a movement shooter, which is very appealing to me. None of these guys are, drastically changing the outlook of the franchise. Dylan Brooks even is a guy that I can be talked into, and I could see as like a buy low that I believe the perception has swung overly negative on him, and there's a chance to capitalize. But it sounds like there's more of a market for him than I kind of expected there to be. So they will be digging through the bargain bin, but there are some names there, and I think once the James Harden shoe falls, we'll have a clearer picture of where they're looking.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because it's kind of it's hard for me to understand. I'm not a cap guy. I'm not a salary guy. When you're looking at the mid-level exception, how do they get access to it? Like, what has to happen for the Sixers to get access to it, or is that just completely impossible at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I defer to Brian Toperic for most of these questions.
Fair enough.
The cap stuff, it feels like the more I read on it, just the more confused I get.
That's how
I will say, like, the mid-level specifically, that's going to be one of the bigger areas impacted by this new CBA, which goes into effect July 1st, and teams only received the full copy of today, which is pretty wild to me. But I believe it's out of the question for the Sixers that they're going to price themselves out of it, is my understanding of it. I can't give a too clear of a picture of why exactly that is, but I don't think they're going to have access to that money is the bottom line.
Fair enough. They got guys they need to bring back ultimately. So as we discussed all of this, it sounds like the Sixers are running it back, Sean, based on what we've discussed here.
Yeah.
Is that your perception at this point?
Yeah, pretty much, to be honest. And really, the statement from Daryl Morey here and what he's saying through this is that he believes Doc Rivers was the biggest issue with the Sixers. I know there's plenty of people who felt that way all of Doc Rivers' tenure, all of last year. We'll see if that comes. I personally, I need to see more change as well. But maybe that is just a couple free agents that change the rotation and change the picture. That might be enough for me, depending on what those names are, how guys fall. But that does seem to be the way things are trending, and that what we should be expecting at this point.
It's disappointing to hear it come out of your mouth, but maybe by the time the season starts, I can work myself. I will. Let's be honest. I'll work myself back in on the Sixers, calling them a contender. I'll just be a little bit harder. I get a little bit harder on them each year since I've started doing content and actually putting my thoughts out into the universe. So I'm going to get a little bit or a lot more harder on this team in the regular season, especially. But it'll be interesting nonetheless once Friday finally gets here, once we hit the end of the moratorium. Is that what it's called on Friday?
Yeah.
The moratorium period, if I'm saying that right. Once again, salary cap, deadline, things like that, not my ballpark. I just focus on what's going on the court for the most part. But it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out, Sean. Once again, before I get you out of here, man, I want to give you the opportunity to plug all of the content you got being put out right now and where the viewers out there can find that content.
Yeah, I appreciate you for having me on once again, Scotty. Always good talking hoop with you. So it was good to chat. You can check me out on Twitter at Sean_Barnard1. Check out PickSwap Media on YouTube or all the socials as well, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all that. So you can check out PickSwap Media there. We'll have a new podcast dropping at 7 on there, so make sure to check that out. And check out Fox 1025 The Gambler, doing some fun things on the YouTube side of things there, trying to grow that, as well as on the radio airwaves if you're driving in your car and want to flip something on.
Yes,
So
sir.
you can hear me between 11 and 1 on Saturday, between 3 and 6 on Friday, and kind of varies throughout the week. But I'm just follow on Twitter, and I'm around everywhere.
Keep you updated.
Yeah.
Hey, that's why I let you go through it, because you make sure you get everything out there, man. I know I did not know your hours on the Gamblers, so I'm glad you read those out as well, because I'm gonna definitely check you out when I'm in the car and stuff like that. But I'll be sure to tune in tonight at 7, man. Thank you for joining the show as always, Sean. As you said, I'm likewise with you. It's mutual. Love talking hoops with you. Keep up the great work, my man, and we will see you next time, man. For myself, for Sean, have a great rest of your evening there. If you're not subscribed to DSM Media, be sure to hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel. Hit the like button to let us know you like the content. And, of course, hit that notifications bell so you're notified each and every time we go live. That is going to be it for this episode of Scotty Talks NBA. Peace.